The count that came up short. The cabinet was made of iron, painted red, bolted to the stone wall of the powder house with 4 3-inch lag screws sunk into the rock itself. It was 18 inches wide and 24 inches tall, and it held on any given morning between 200 and 400 blasting caps arranged in paper sleeves of 25, stacked in rows on 3 interior shelves. The lock was a Corbin No. 7, the same model used in every federally regulated explosive storage facility in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There were 2 keys in existence. One hung on a nail inside the shift supervisor's office. The other lived on a steel ring on Eino Mäkinen's belt, alongside the key to his house, the key to the shaft house cage controls, and a small brass key to a lockbox where he kept his children's birth certificates. On the morning of October 14th, 1913, Eino opened the red cabinet at 5:47 a.m. before the first shift descended into the copper mine below Calumet, Michigan, and counted 156 blasting caps where there should have been 200. He counted again. Still 156. He counted a third time, sleeve by sleeve, laying each paper packet on the shelf door and tapping each cap through the paper with his index finger. Still 156. 44 were gone. He stood for a moment in the powder house, with the cabinet open and the cold morning pressing in from the single small window set high in the stone wall. Outside, the shaft house machinery had already begun its slow morning cycle. The winding drums turning, the cage descending. The familiar, deep, mechanical rhythm that had governed every morning of Eino's life for the past 9 years. He was 41 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, with the particular economy of movement that men develop after decades of working in spaces too small or too dangerous for unnecessary gestures. He had come to Calumet from the Finnish town of Tampere in 1902 with $11 in his coat pocket and a letter of introduction to a distant cousin who worked in the No. 5 shaft. He had learned English in the first winter and the specific mechanical language of copper mining in the second, and by 1906 he had been appointed powder keeper for the morning shift, a position of limited authority and considerable responsibility, since the man who controlled the blasting caps controlled the pace of every day's work underground. He had never lost a cap, not one, in 7 years. He closed the cabinet, locked it, and stood for another moment looking at the red paint. Then he went to find the shift foreman. The copper mine at Calumet was not one mine. It was a system, a vast interconnected network of shafts, drifts, and crosscuts, extending more than a mile underground beneath 25 square miles of the Eino Peninsula in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, operated by the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company, which was the largest copper producer in the United States and had been extracting ore from this same red rock ground since 1866. By 1913, C&H, as everyone in Calumet called it, employed approximately 9,000 men directly and supported a population of nearly 40,000 people through the wages those men brought home. The company owned not only the mine but the town, the housing rows, the library, the bathhouses, the hospital, the church buildings. It was a company in the way that a government is a company, total, assumed, inescapable. In July of 1913, the Western Federation of Miners had called a strike. The issue was the one-man drill. C&H had introduced a new rock drill in 1913 that could be operated by a single man instead of the traditional two-man team. The company presented this as progress. The miners understood it as something else. Half the men doing the same work for the same production rate, with the other half laid off, and the survivors absorbing the additional risk of operating heavy drilling equipment alone in confined underground spaces. The WFM put it simply in their strike literature. The company has decided that one man's life is worth one man's wage, and one man's safety is nobody's business. 15,000 workers across the Keweenaw walked out on July 23, 1913. By October 14th, the morning Eino counted 156 blasting caps where there should have been 200. The strike was 83 days old. The company had hired replacement workers shipped in from outside the region. The Michigan governor had deployed 2,500 National Guard troops to maintain order. There had been 12 deaths since July, attributed in official reports to various causes. Accidents, altercations. One case ruled suicide. The Citizens Alliance, a private organization funded by the mining company and its business associates, had established a presence in every neighborhood of Calumet, monitoring union activity and, according to accounts later collected by the congressional investigators who arrived the following year, conducting systematic intimidation of striking workers and their families. Eino Mäkinen was not a union member. He had not walked out in July. He was a powder keeper, a specialized position, and the company had made clear, through his direct supervisor, that powder keepers who remained at their posts would be protected from retribution regardless of what happened to the strike. He had stayed because he had 4 children and because he understood, with the pragmatic clarity of a man who had come from nothing and built something modest and fragile, that his family could not survive 3 months without wages. He had stayed, and he had counted his caps every morning, and he had tried not to look too directly at what was happening around him. Now 44 caps were missing, and he needed to report it. The shift foreman's name was Gordon Cleave. He was a compact, red-faced Cornishman who had been with C&H for 22 years, and who wore his authority the way men wear a coat they have stopped noticing, as if it had always been there and always would be. He was standing outside the shaft house office with a clipboard when Eino found him at 6:04 a.m., watching the replacement workers file toward the cage. There are 44 caps missing from the powder cabinet, Eino said. Cleave did not look up from his clipboard immediately. When he did, his expression was the particular blankness of a man performing the calculation of how much trouble a piece of information will cause him. Missing? He said. The count is 156. It should be 200. I counted 3 times. How long since your last count? Yesterday morning. 200 at morning count, 200 at end of shift. Then between yesterday end of shift and this morning. Yes. Cleave wrote something on his clipboard that Eino could not see. I'll make a note. Check again at noon. Sometimes the count gets off in the sleeve packaging. I have been counting caps for 7 years, Eino said. The sleeves are fine. Cleave looked at him steadily for a moment. Write it in your log. I'll talk to the superintendent. And then, before Eino could respond, you have a first shift in 40 minutes. I'd focus on that. He walked away. Eino wrote it in his log. He wrote, morning count, October 14th. 156 units present in cabinet. Expected 200. Deficit, 44 units. Reported to G. Cleave, 6:04 a.m. He wrote it in his precise, compressed handwriting, the kind of writing a man develops when he learns a language in his 30s and is still slightly uncertain about the extra space cursive takes. Then he descended into the mine with the replacement workers and did his job for 8 hours and came back up at 3:30 p.m. and counted the caps again. Still 156. The superintendent never came. The Powder House logbook was a standard C and H form, a green-covered ledger with columns for date, shift, transaction type, quantity received, quantity issued, and the signature of the authorizing powder keeper. Eino was the only powder keeper on the morning shift. There was a second man, a Slovenian named Horvat, who covered the afternoon shift, and a third, a young replacement worker brought in from downstate in August, who covered the night shift. The night man's name was Parker. He was 23 years old and had been a hardware store clerk before the strike. Eino spent his first free afternoon, October 15th, going through the logbook from the beginning of the month. The entries were orderly. His own entries were always orderly: date, shift, clear quantities, his signature in full. Horvat's entries were reliable, slightly less precise in their columns, but consistent. Parker's entries were the entries of a man who had learned the format recently and was being careful about it, which produced a kind of careful correctness that itself told you something. On October 9th, 5 days before the missing count, Parker had logged a standard night shift issue, 12 units, shaft 7 prep, authorized J. Trevelyan. J. Trevelyan was the night shift supervisor. The issue was normal, the quantity was normal. The time noted in the margin was 2:17 a.m., which was a slightly unusual hour for a shaft prep issue, but not impossible. On October 11th, Parker had logged another issue, 18 units, shaft 4 prep, authorized J. Trevelyan, same supervisor. Time, 1:48 a.m. On October 12th, 14 units, number 3 drift clear, authorized J. Trevelyan. Time, 3:05 a.m. Eino sat with the logbook and did arithmetic in the margin of his own log. 12 plus 18 plus 14 equaled 44. He checked the shaft prep records for October 9th, 11th, and 12th. The shaft prep records were kept separately, in a larger gray ledger that listed all blasting activity for each working area by shift. A cap issue required a corresponding blast record: date, location, supervising blaster, result. There was no blast record for shaft 7 on October 9th, no blast record for shaft 4 on October 11th, no blast record for number 3 drift on October 12th. 44 caps had been signed out of the cabinet over 3 nights by Supervisor J. Trevelyan. No blast had been recorded, no work had been done. And the authorization signatures? Eino looked at them again carefully in the ledger, holding the book at an angle to the window light, were not Trevelyan's hand. He had seen Trevelyan sign requisition forms before. The man signed his name in a particular way, the T large and looping, the V pressed hard. These signatures were smaller, tighter, done by someone copying a name they rarely wrote. The caps were not used in the mine. They were taken somewhere else. He waited 3 days before speaking to anyone. He spent those 3 days checking 3 additional things. First, he visited the shaft prep supervisor, a man named Baraga, who kept his own parallel count of explosives used per shift, and asked casually about the blast work on the nights of October 9th, 11th, and 12th. Baraga said there had been no blast prep on those nights. Weather had pushed the number 3 work back by a week. Shaft 7 had been idle since October 5th due to a cage mechanical failure. Eino thanked him and left. Second, he checked the key log. The powder house key log was a separate small register kept in the shift supervisor's office, in which every removal of the second cabinet key, the one on the supervisor's nail, was supposed to be recorded, along with the name of the person who borrowed it and the time of return. This was a safety regulation required by the State of Michigan Bureau of Labor and Industrial Statistics under the 1909 Explosives Storage Act. The key log showed no removals during October 9th, 11th, or 12th. The key had stayed on the nail. Or somewhere between staying on the nail and not being logged, the caps had left the cabinet. Third, he examined the cabinet lock itself with a small magnifying glass he used for reading small print supplier invoices. The Corbin No. 7 lock showed scratch marks around the keyhole. Fine, radial marks, consistent with the insertion of a key that did not quite fit. Not a pick, not a crowbar. Another key. A key that was close to the right shape but not identical. The kind of marks left by a duplicate cut in a hurry, slightly off tolerance. Someone had a second key to his cabinet. A key that did not exist in any official record. There were 3 men in Calumet who could cut a duplicate Corbin No. 7 from a wax impression. A locksmith on 5th Street named Doran. A hardware merchant on Mine Street named Seppala. And a man who worked in the C&H machine shop and was known to do small metal work on the side. Eino went to Doran first. He explained that he was checking on a routine security matter and asked whether anyone had requested a duplicate of that particular Corbin model in the past several months. Doran said he hadn't cut a Corbin No. 7 in over a year. He went to the hardware store. Seppala was a Finnish man, 10 years older than Eino, who spoke to him in their shared language behind the counter while 2 customers browsed the nail bins. Seppala said he had cut a Corbin No. 7 blank in September. He said the man who ordered it had paid in cash, double the usual rate, and had asked him not to make a note of it. He said the man had worn a Citizens Alliance lapel pin. He described him. Medium height, light-colored coat, a scar below his left ear in the shape of a small hook. Did you get his name? Eino asked. Seppala shook his head. He didn't offer it. Would you put this in writing? Seppala looked at him for a long moment. The particular look of a man calculating the cost of honesty in a town where the company owned everything. No, he said. I would not. He went home. That night, after the children were asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and wrote everything down in a composition notebook he kept locked in the same box as the birth certificates. He wrote the dates, the cap counts, the false signatures, the key scratch marks, Seppala's account, everything. He wrote it in Finnish, which was not a precaution he felt proud of, but was a precaution he felt was reasonable. He had 44 missing blasting caps, 3 false log entries, a duplicate key cut in secret by a man with a Citizens Alliance pin, and a shift supervisor who had written him 1 small note on official company stationery 3 days after the original report. The note read, Mäkinen. Counts sometimes shift during high traffic periods. No formal report has been filed. No further action required. Please ensure your shift logs are kept current. Cleve. No further action required. He read the note twice. Then he folded it into the composition notebook with the rest. It was October 18th, 1913. There were 67 days until Christmas Eve. He did not know that yet. He did not know what Christmas Eve would bring to a second-floor meeting hall on 7th Street, 3 blocks from the mine, He did not know that 73 people, 59 of them children, would die in a stairwell stampede after someone shouted fire into a crowded room where there was no fire. He did not know that the question of who shouted it would be debated for the next 100 years without a definitive answer, that a congressional investigation would open and close without charges, that the Citizens Alliance would deny any involvement, and that the man with C and H's name on his paycheck, who stood at the top of the stairs on Christmas Eve, would never be identified in any official document. He did not know any of that. What he knew was that 44 blasting caps had left a locked cabinet in the middle of 3 nights and gone somewhere that was not a mine shaft, and that the company had decided this required no further action, and that somewhere in Calumet there was a man with a hook-shaped scar below his ear who had paid double rate for a key he wanted no record of. He locked the composition notebook in the box with the birth certificates. He banked the fire. He went to bed. Outside, the winding drums of the shaft house turned through the night, slow and steady, the same sound they made every night, the sound of a machine that did not stop because the men who fed it had stopped. It just found other men. The man with the hook scar, Parker, was gone by the end of October. Eino noticed it first as an absence at the shaft house. The young replacement worker simply stopped appearing for his night shift after October 22nd. He asked Cleve on the morning of October 23rd, with the particular careful neutrality of a man who has learned to ask questions in a way that doesn't sound like questions. He said only that the night shift powder keeper hadn't appeared and asked whether a replacement had been arranged. Cleve said Parker had been reassigned to a surface position. Which surface position? Eino asked. I don't have that detail, Cleve said without looking at him. He checked with the surface crew foreman that afternoon. Parker was not on any surface roster. He asked at the mine office, where a clerk, who answered questions with the specific blankness of someone who has been told not to answer questions, informed him that personnel assignments were a supervisory matter and that he should direct any queries to his shift foreman. He was back where he had started. He tried a different direction. Parker had lived, during his time in Calumet, in company housing on Elm Street, a boarding house run by a widow named Paavola, who kept 7 replacement workers through the fall, fed them twice a day, and had opinions about all of them. Eino went on his afternoon off, a Thursday, and knocked at her door. She answered in Finnish, which saved time. He asked about Parker. She said he had left the boarding house on the night of October 21st with his bag already packed and his week's board paid in advance in cash. She said a man in a light-colored coat had come to the door for him an hour before he left. Did you see his face? Eino asked. She had. She described him, medium height, light coat, a mark below his left ear. Did he say anything? He said he was from the company, Paavola said. He said Parker had been transferred. Eino thanked her and walked home through the early November dark, the cold coming in hard off Lake Superior. The kind of cold that arrives in the Upper Peninsula not gradually but all at once, as though a door has been opened somewhere north of everything. He had a timeline now. The caps were taken over 3 nights, October 9th, 11th, 12th. The false log entries were made in Parker's hand but signed with Trevelyan's name. And on October 21st, 7 days after Eino's first count confirmed the deficit, Parker left Calumet under escort. Someone had been watching the powder house log, and when Eino's count went into the record, Parker became a liability. The strike had entered its fourth month with no resolution visible from any direction. The Western Federation of Miners had 14,000 workers out across the Quinaw Copper District. The Calumet and Hecla Company had replaced approximately 1,800 of them, with workers brought in from outside Michigan, then recruited in Cleveland, in Detroit, in Chicago, offered wages 20% above standard rate, and housing in the company rows, vacated by striking families. The replacement workers were not popular in Calumet in the way that a temperature of negative 10 degrees is not popular. It was not a matter of opinion, it was a fact of the environment, and everyone adapted to it differently. Some adapted with silence. Some adapted with shattered windows. In the first week of November, 3 replacement workers were beaten on their way home from the night shift, and a fourth, a man from downstate Ohio, was hospitalized with a skull fracture. The National Guard had 2,500 troops in the district and 23 in Calumet proper, stationed at the armory on Red Jacket Road. Eino was not a union man and was not a company man, which in the autumn of 1913 in Calumet was a position roughly equivalent to standing in a doorway during a thunderstorm. Technically sheltered, practically exposed. He went to see Trevelyan. J. Trevelyan, James, which he did not use, was the night shift supervisor, a raw-boned man in his early 50s from Cornwall by way of Montana, who had come to Calumet in 1908, and who was known for 2 things: competence in the mine and a temper that arrived without much warning and departed the same way. He was not a Citizens Alliance member as far as Eino knew. He was not a union man. He was a man who did his job and left everything else to other people. Eino found him at the shift change on November 4th and asked to speak with him for 5 minutes. Trevelyan agreed with the wary patience of a man who has learned that 5-minute conversations often aren't. They stood outside the shaft house in the cold, breath showing, while the incoming shift filed past. "Someone signed your name in the powder log," Eino said, 3 times in October. "Night shift issues I can't match to any blast record." Trevelyan looked at him steadily. "My name. October 9th, 11th, and 12th, each time authorizing a cap issue to Parker. Parker signed them or I signed them? Parker wrote them. Your name at the bottom, but not your hand." A long pause. The last of the incoming shift had gone past, and they were briefly alone on the gravel apron outside the shaft house. "I want to see them," Trevelyan said. "I have copies in my log," Eino said. "The originals are in the green ledger. Go get the green ledger." Eino went inside and came back out with the logbook. He opened it to October 9th and handed it to Trevelyan, who held it up to the shaft house lamp and read the entry carefully, then read the next 2. His expression did the thing faces do when a man is deciding how angry to be and in which direction. "That is not my signature," Trevelyan said. "No," Eino agreed. "I didn't authorize any cap issue on those nights." "I know." "I didn't come near the powder house those nights. I can tell you exactly where I was on October 9th. I was eating supper at my sister-in-law's house until 9 p.m., and then I was at the armory meeting until almost midnight." "Will you put that in writing?" The pause this time was longer. Trevelyan closed the logbook and handed it back. "I'll think about it," he said. "I want to talk to Cleve." "Cleve knows," Eino said. "I reported the count on October 14th. He said no formal report was needed." Trevelyan looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man revising an estimate. Then he said something that Eino thought about for the rest of November. "Eino, you have children." "4," Eino said. "Be careful," Trevelyan said, and walked away. He did not hear from Trevelyan again for 11 days. During those 11 days, 3 things happened. The first was that a brick was thrown through the window of a house on Pine Street, belonging to a WFM union organizer, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. No one was hurt. No one was charged. The second was that the Citizens Alliance published a 2-page advertisement in the Mining Gazette, listing the names of 847 Calumet residents who had signed a declaration of support for the company's right to operate during the strike. The names were organized by street and neighborhood. Eino's name was not on the list. He was not surprised. He was, however, aware that the list existed and that people were reading it. The third thing was a note. It arrived under the door of the powder house on the morning of November 9th, a Thursday, folded once, written in pencil on a torn piece of brown wrapping paper in English that was not entirely fluent. It read, "You are asking about the caps. Stop asking. This is not a safe thing to ask about. The man you are looking for has friends who know where 4 children sleep." He stood in the powder house and read it 3 times. Then he folded it and put it in his coat pocket and went about his shift. That evening he added it to the composition notebook. He did not tell his wife about it, which was a decision he made and remade several times over the following week, without reaching a final conclusion about whether it had been the right one. His wife Eino was a practical woman who had survived a Finnish winter and an Atlantic crossing, and the first year in Calumet on wages that left nothing at the end of the month, and she was not prone to panic. But she was also the mother of 4 children, which is a condition that creates a very specific relationship with risk. He did not tell her, he kept counting, and he kept a separate tally in the composition notebook of something he had begun tracking in mid-October without quite articulating his reason. The daily cap usage recorded in the blast logs, cross-referenced against the actual activity in each shaft and drift. He was looking for other discrepancies, other places where the numbers going in didn't match the work coming out. He found 2. A 5-cap deficit on October 29th, logged under a Shaft 3 prep that the prep supervisor said had been postponed. A 3-cap deficit on November 2nd, logged under a number 1 drift maintenance issue that carried an authorization signature Eino could not match to any supervisor currently employed at the mine. That made 52 caps total, taken over 5 incidents across a 25-day period in quantities too small to trigger an automatic audit under Michigan mine safety regulations, which required a formal investigation only when a single event deficit exceeded 25 units. Whoever was doing this knew the regulations. He spent 2 free afternoons in the first week of November at the public library on 6th Street, which was one of the buildings C&H had built and funded, and which therefore carried the company's name on its cornerstone, a fact that Eino found quietly ironic as he sat at a reading table, studying everything the library held about blasting cap types and incendiary applications. The powder house caps were standard Bickford-type electric blasting caps, manufactured by the Hercules Powder Company, rated for standard copper ore blasting operations. They were not, in and of themselves, incendiary devices. But they were, as Eino read in a 1908 mining safety bulletin issued by the Michigan Bureau of Labor. The most common initiating component in improvised incendiary constructions. Devices that combined a blasting cap's electrical trigger with a secondary flammable agent to produce sustained fire rather than explosive pressure. A single Bickford cap, wired to a battery and embedded in a quantity of common lamp oil, would produce a fire hot enough to ignite a wooden structure within 4 to 6 seconds of activation. He sat with that for a moment. The Quantities copper strikes of 1913 had produced 12 deaths in the first 83 days. Most had been attributed to confrontations on picket lines, accidents in the replacement worker crews, and one collapse in a partially maintained shaft. None had involved fire. The National Guard was present specifically to prevent large-scale violence. The Citizens Alliance, whatever its methods, operated primarily through economic pressure and social intimidation, which was effective and ugly, but not the same as organized arson, unless the caps were for something else entirely. He needed to find the man with the hook scar. He found him on November 15th, not by investigation, but by accident, which is often how things are found when you have been looking long enough. He was walking home from the mine at 4 p.m., taking the long route past the company store on 5th Street because he needed tobacco. He smoked a pipe in the evenings, a habit he allowed himself on the grounds that it was his only one. And he passed the Citizens Alliance storefront office on the corner of 5th and Elm. The office had been established in August, 2 weeks after the strike began, in a former hardware space. It had a large painted sign in the window, Citizens Alliance of Calumet, protecting the rights of the law-abiding community. And, in the late afternoon, it was inhabited by 3 or 4 men visible through the glass, seated around a central table. One of them, in a light-colored coat, turned his head toward the window as Eino passed. Eino had 3 seconds. He used them to note the face, broad, pale, perhaps 40 years old, and the mark below the left ear, a puckered scar in the shape of a small hook, white against winter-pale skin. He kept walking. He sat in his kitchen that evening and thought about what to do. He had placed the man's face at the Citizens Alliance. That was a connection, but not a name, not an action, not anything that could be brought to a journalist or a court, or even a sympathetic ear without sounding like the paranoia of a nervous powder keeper who had miscounted his own caps. He needed something documentary. He needed the man's name. He went back to Seppala. He described the face. Seppala listened behind his counter with his arms folded and then said, "I know who that is. His name is Custer. Harold Custer. He's a company deputy, unofficial. He's not on any payroll I know of, but he works for the Alliance." "Will you write that down?" Eino asked. "No," Seppala said. "I received a note," Eino said, "about my children." Seppala looked at him carefully. "Then you should stop," he said. "Or go to the guard commander, or leave Calumet. Those are the choices." Writing things down is not a choice that makes anyone safer, Eino. Not you and not me. He went home. He did not stop. On November 19th, he found something in the powder house that he had not put there. It was wedged between the back of the iron cabinet and the stone wall, a 2-inch gap that he had never had reason to examine before, a narrow space that collected dust and the occasional dead insect. He found it because a cap sleeve had slipped off the back of the bottom shelf and when he reached in to retrieve it, his fingers touched something paper. He worked it out carefully. It was a folded receipt. Commercial stationery printed header reading, A. Burnside and Sons, General Suppliers, Houghton, Michigan. Below the printed header in handwriting, November 7th, 5 gallons lamp oil, K. And below that, a column of numbers, 4, 4, 3, 3, 6, 4, 3, 4, 4, 6, 4, 3. 12 numbers adding up to 48. Beside each number, a letter abbreviation he did not immediately recognize. He recognized them on his third reading. They were shift codes. C and H used a 2-letter abbreviation system for each of the 12 working shaft locations. Number 1 through number 5 shafts, and 7 drift and cross-cut positions designated by letter. The abbreviations on the receipt matched 7 of the 12 locations. 7 locations. 48 units distributed across them, on a schedule he could not yet decipher, and 5 gallons of lamp oil purchased on November 7th by someone who signed only the letter K. He sat down on the powder house floor with his back against the stone wall. He was aware that his hands were steady, which surprised him, because what he was looking at was not a count discrepancy or a forged signature. It was a plan. A distribution plan for 48 incendiary initiating components across 7 working areas of the mine. A plan left, whether by carelessness or intention, in a 2-inch gap behind the cabinet of the man in charge of the inventory. He photographed it in his memory, returned it to the gap, and went to his locker for paper and pencil. He had copied it onto paper and hidden the copy in his coat pocket by the time the first replacement workers began arriving for the morning shift. That evening he finally told Eino. He sat her down at the kitchen table after the children were asleep and told her about the caps, the signatures, Parker, the note, Custer's face, and the receipt. He told her in Finnish, carefully, in the order things had happened, while the fire in the kitchen stove made its deep, slow sound, and the wind off Superior pressed against the north wall of the house. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for approximately 2 minutes, which in Eino's case meant she was deciding something rather than reacting to something. Then she said, "What is the plan for?" "I think it's for the mine," Eino said. 7 shaft locations, started during the strike. I think someone wants to disable the mine." "Disable," she said, "or destroy part of it, and drive the replacement workers out." "Yes." She was quiet again. "Is it the union?" she asked. "The WFM doesn't operate that way," Eino said. "They've said publicly they won't damage property. They're under congressional pressure. There's an investigation coming from Washington. They wouldn't risk it." She looked at him steadily. "Then who benefits from the mine burning?" He had been asking himself this for a week. He had been circling the answer without wanting to land on it. "The company," he said quietly, "benefits from the mine burning if the fire gets blamed on the union. It ends the strike. It ends the investigation. It gives the guard legal basis to clear the district." The kitchen was very quiet. "We need to go to the guard commander," Eino said. "With what?" "A receipt I found and didn't take. Counts in a log they already chose not to act on. A locksmith who won't write his name. A foreman who told me to be careful and walked away. Then go to the newspaper. The newspaper took C and H advertising money and printed their alliance supporter list." She folded her hands on the table in the Finnish way, flat, deliberate, done. "Then you need to find someone who will write their name down," she said. and you need to do it before whoever put that receipt behind your cabinet comes back for it." He nodded. He went to bed. The next morning, when he opened the cabinet and began his count, he reached into the gap between the iron back and the stone wall. The receipt was gone. He did not stop moving. He went through the count with his hands and his voice, his lips forming numbers while his mind went somewhere else entirely, somewhere very clear and very cold. 48 caps in a 7-location distribution plan, 5 gallons of lamp oil, and now the man who had left the receipt in his powder house had been back inside his powder house and removed it, which meant the man had a key, which meant Custer, or whoever Custer worked for, had been inside this room while Eino was not here, and had retrieved the one piece of paper that connected the individual pieces of what Eino had been assembling for 29 days. He finished the count. He locked the cabinet. He stood in the powder house and looked at the gap behind the cabinet for a moment. Then he took from his coat pocket the copy he had made, the copy he had folded and sewn that same night into the interior lining of his winter coat, between the wool and the silk facing, the way his mother had once sewed small amounts of money into her clothing before the journey across the ocean. He pressed his hand flat against the lining of his coat. Still there. He had one copy. One. And he had come within one night of losing the original before understanding what it was. He also had now absolute confirmation of something he had been trying not to believe for a month. This was not a union action. Union men didn't walk into a non-striking company worker's locked powder house with a duplicate key to retrieve their own planning documents. This was an operation that required access, specifically company-level access, to a facility under company control. The mine was being prepared to burn, and the fire would be laid by the same hand that had built it. He wrote one name in the composition notebook that evening: Harold Custer. Beneath it, he wrote 2 questions he could not yet answer. Who does Custer answer to? What is the date? He did not learn the date until November 25th, when the Italian Hall Benefit Society posted hand-lettered notices around Calumet announcing its annual Christmas Eve celebration for the families of striking miners, women and children. No admission charge. Gifts provided by the WFM Michigan District Fund. The celebration was scheduled for December 24th, 1913, from 2 p.m. until evening. The venue was the second floor of the Italian Hall on 7th Street, a building 68 feet long and 27 feet wide, with a single main staircase 36 inches across. Everyone in the Finnish community was going. His wife, his 4 children, everyone. He looked at the numbers in his composition notebook. 44 caps, taken in the first 3 incidents. 8 more in 2 subsequent incidents. 52 total. 7 shaft locations in the distribution plan. 5 gallons of lamp oil. 24 days until Christmas Eve. Then he looked up from the notebook and at the window, where the Upper Peninsula dark was already complete at 4 p.m., and Lake Superior beyond the houses was invisible, except for the sound of it pressing against the winter shore, steady and cold, and entirely indifferent. He had 24 days. He had a name no one would write down, a receipt no one else had seen, and a plan sewn into the lining of his coat. And somewhere in Calumet, Harold Custer, or whoever Harold Custer answered to, was looking at the same calendar and thinking about the second floor of the Italian Hall. What the fire was for, He went to the guard commander on November 27th. Colonel P.H. Shaw commanded the National Guard contingent in Calumet from a temporary headquarters established in the armory on Red Jacket Road, a solid brick building that smelled of wool and rifle oil and the specific institutional cold of a military space that was never heated quite enough. Eino had requested the appointment through the armory's front desk clerk, stating only that he had information relevant to public safety in the mine district. He was given 30 minutes on a Tuesday morning. Shaw was 55 years old, a career National Guard officer with the economy of movement and speech that senior command produces in men who have been managing controlled problems for 20 years. He listened to Eino for 22 of the 30 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the pages Eino had brought. Copies, not originals, because the originals stayed sewn into the coat. And he looked at Eino's count logs, and he looked at the written summary Eino had prepared over 3 evenings, 9 pages in English, with the numbers clearly organized in a margin column. At minute 23, Shaw said, "You're a powder keeper." "Yes," Eino said. "Not a union man." "No, not a company man either, apparently." "I keep the caps," Eino said. "When there are 44 fewer caps than there should be, I have a professional responsibility to report it." Shaw looked at the 9 pages again. "The name you've given me, Custer, is he currently employed by C and H?" "Not officially. He appears to work for the Citizens Alliance." "The Alliance is a private civic organization," Shaw said. "I don't have jurisdiction over its members' private activities unless they break state law. What you're describing, duplicate keys, cap issues, is all internal mine property management. That's a matter for the company or for the state mine inspector." "I reported it to the company," Eino said. "The company said no further action was required." "Then you should report it to the state mine inspector." Eino looked at him steadily. "I am reporting it to the man with 2,500 soldiers in the district." Shaw was quiet for a moment. "I'll make a note of what you've told me. Documentary evidence, physical evidence, not copies. Bring it back," he said. He stood up. "Receipt you described. If you can get the original, come back." He had told Eino to bring him the one piece of evidence that had already been taken. "If you obtain the original," he went to the WFM district organizer on December 2nd. The Western Federation of Miners operated its Calumet district office from a back room of a hardware store on Oak Street, a measure of the operational conditions under which the union had been functioning since August, when its original office had been vandalized 3 times in 6 days, and the landlord had terminated the lease. The district organizer was a compact, rapid man named Peterman, who had run mining union operations in Colorado before coming to Michigan, and who had the specific wariness of someone who has spent years in rooms where what is said might later be used against him. Eino laid out what he had. The cap deficit, the distribution plan, the lamp oil receipt, the 7 shaft locations, the dates. Peterman listened with his elbows on the desk. When Eino finished, he said, "You're telling me the company is planning to sabotage its own mine. I'm telling you someone removed 52 blasting caps from a locked cabinet over 5 incidents, logged false authorizations, purchased lamp oil, and created a distribution plan for 7 shaft locations. I'm telling you the night worker who signed the logs has been removed from Calumet. And I'm telling you that a man connected to the Citizens Alliance has a key to my cabinet. To frame the Union, Peterman said. That conclusion is yours. I am telling you the facts. Peterman was quiet for 11 seconds. Then, Eino, there is a congressional investigation opening in January. Senator Miles from Ohio has a subcommittee looking at the entire Copper District situation. If this is what you say it is, if there is a plan to commit arson and attribute it to the WFM, that is exactly the kind of evidence the subcommittee needs. January is 5 weeks away, Eino said. I'm telling you about a plan with a timeline. I don't know what the timeline is, but I have a receipted oil purchase dated November 7th and a distribution plan that is complete. Go to the state mine inspector, Peterman said. Get it on official record. The guard commander said the same thing, Eino said. Peterman spread his hands flat on the desk, the gesture of a man who has run out of official channels to suggest. Then write everything down, he said. Get it to someone outside Calumet. A newspaper. The local paper is C&H. The Detroit papers. The Chicago papers. He paused. There is a journalist from the Cleveland Press here right now. Her name is Donaghy. She's been covering the strike since September. She is not a company paper. He wrote the name on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. Put the composition notebook somewhere safe, Peterman added as Eino stood to leave. Not in your house. He found Donaghy at the Hotel Scott on Calumet Avenue on December 4th, a Thursday evening. She was 38 years old, a small, precise woman who wore her coat indoors in the hotel lobby because the heating was inadequate, and who had been filing dispatches to Cleveland twice a week for 11 weeks, and had developed the specific, focused patience of a reporter who knows a story has a center but hasn't found it yet. She read his written summary in full at the lobby table, while the hotel's small front desk clerk made a show of not watching them. She asked 4 questions, all of them exactly right, about the key, about Parker's departure, about Trevelyan's reaction, about the gap between the cap deficit and Michigan State audit thresholds. Then she sat back. This is extraordinary, she said. Can you publish it? Not yet, not with copies and verbal accounts. The paper's legal department will require a named corroborating source or a piece of original physical evidence. The original was taken from the powder house. I know, she said. That's actually its own story. The fact that it was taken tells you something about who has access. But I can't print the evidence was taken and here is a copy. Not without a named source. Trevelyan will not put his name on paper. Seppala? No. She tapped a finger on the table. There are 22 days until Christmas, she said. I can file a general background piece on mine security during the strike. No names, no specifics. It gets the outline into the record. Then when the congressional investigation opens in January, I have told you I don't know when the timeline ends, Eino said quietly. She looked at him steadily. I know, she said. Go home, Eino. Keep the notebook safe. If anything changes before the 24th, if you see Custer again, if any more caps go missing, if anyone contacts you, come here directly. He went home. He put the composition notebook in a tin box, wrapped it in oilcloth, and buried it 14 inches deep beneath the floorboard he had pulled up in the corner of the woodshed where the children never went. He took the copy sewn into his coat, removed it carefully with a seam ripper, and put that too in the tin box. He put the 9-page summary in the box. He put Trevelyan's original note in the box. He put the threatening message about his 4 children in the box. He sealed the box with candle wax and replaced the floorboard and swept shavings over it. Then he sat with Eino at the kitchen table and told her where the box was. December 24th, 1913 was a Wednesday. It was cold as it only gets in the Upper Peninsula in December. A cold that does not move because there is nothing to move against. Just the flat, frozen air coming west off Superior and pressing down on the Quinault like a hand. Eino had the children dressed by noon. Marta and Helvi in their good coats. Toivo and little Arvo in wool scarves and the caps with the ear flaps. They were going to the Italian Hall. The WFM Michigan district had announced gifts for the children of striking families. And though Eino's family was not a striking family, Eino had a sister whose husband had walked out in July, and the children would go together. The celebration began at 2 p.m. There would be singing. There would be a Christmas tree 6 feet tall, decorated with 100 paper ornaments the women had made over the previous 2 weeks. Eino was scheduled for the afternoon shift. He kissed Eino at the door at 1:15 p.m. and watched them go down the street, the 4 children making the small, rushing progress that children make when they know something good is ahead of them. Eino matching their pace with the long-stepping efficiency she had. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he put on his coat and walked to the mine. The first word reached the shaft house at 4:23 p.m. One of the surface workers came in from the street, red-faced, breathing hard, and said something in Croatian that Eino did not understand, but that carried in it, unmistakably, the specific sound of catastrophe, the compressed and urgent sound of a man delivering news he is still trying to believe himself. Eino grabbed the man's arm and said, "English, what happened?" "The hall," the man said. "Italian hall. Children. Someone shouted fire. The stairs." He was running before the sentence was finished. He ran 6 blocks. He was not the only one running. By the time he reached 7th Street, the approach to the hall was already crowded. The crowd of a disaster in progress. People pushing both toward and away from the building simultaneously. Women calling names. Men carrying children. A guard soldier trying to establish a perimeter with his arms out, and nobody paying attention to him. The front doors of the hall were open, and from the second floor windows Eino could see nothing. No fire, no smoke, no sign of the disaster, except its aftermath, which was arriving through the doors in the arms of men who were carrying children who were not moving. Eino was standing on the opposite side of the street with Marta and Helvi beside her, holding Arvo in both arms. Toivo was a step behind, pressed against her coat. They were unharmed. He crossed the street in 8 steps and put both arms around all of them at once. "We were near the back," Eino said into his shoulder. "Near the back of the room. We heard it from there. Some people went for the stairs." She stopped. "We did not go for the stairs." He held her for a while without speaking. 73 people died in the stairwell of the Italian Hall on the afternoon of December 24th, 1913. 59 of them were children. The cause of death in every case was compressive asphyxiation. People crushed against the closed outer door at the bottom of the staircase, or crushed against each other in the narrow 36-inch stairwell, in a stampede that lasted less than 4 minutes, from first shout to last death. There was no fire. There never had been. Someone had entered the second-floor hall, shouted the word, and left. That person was never identified. Not in 1913. Not by the congressional investigation that opened in January 1914. Not in the 110 years that followed. Eino went to the powder house on December 26th. He counted the caps. 214. There had been no usage over the holiday shutdown days. The count was exactly correct. He stood in the powder house and thought about 200 caps and 52 missing since October and 5 gallons of lamp oil and a distribution plan for 7 shaft locations that had never been executed. He thought about it for a long time. The mine sabotage plan had not been executed. The caps were not in the mine. They had disappeared. 52 caps, unrecovered, unaccounted for, gone from the district without a trace. Plan A, as he had come to think of it, had been abandoned. Somewhere between the night the receipt disappeared from behind the cabinet and the afternoon of December 24th, someone had decided that burning 7 shaft locations was not the right method. A fire in a mine required explanation. It required investigation. It left physical evidence, char patterns, accelerant traces, cap components in the rubble. A voice in a crowded room left nothing. He thought about the 52 missing caps. Thought about where 52 blasting caps go if they are not used for the purpose they were purchased. Thought about the deliberate, careful planning it had taken to remove them over 5 separate incidents in quantities below the audit threshold, with false log entries and a duplicate key and a night worker who was gone before anyone could ask him questions. All of that planning. And then, nothing. No fire, no sabotage, a different method, a different day, a different location entirely. Unless the plan had always been the same. Unless the location was always the Italian hall and the mine had just been the rehearsal, or the backup, or the threat that was meant to be found, just barely, just enough to focus attention on the mine while something else was arranged 3 blocks away. He wrote this in the composition notebook, recovered from the tin box in the woodshed on the evening of December 26th. He wrote it carefully. He wrote that he could not prove it. He wrote that it was a conclusion drawn from pattern and timing and the specific logic of men who were trying to produce an effect while destroying the evidence of intention. He wrote, if the plan was always to blame the Union for violence against its own people, the caps were proof of intent to commit violence. Whether or not they were used, someone was planning to commit an act that could be attributed to the WFM. The Italian hall accomplished the same result without physical evidence. He did not know if he was right. He knew he had no way to prove it. The congressional subcommittee arrived in Calumet in early January 1914. Congressman John Donahue of Ohio chaired the investigation into the Copper District strike and the events of December 24th. The subcommittee held hearings in the Hotel Scott, the same lobby where Eino had sat across from the journalist Donahue 2 weeks earlier, over a period of 11 days, taking testimony from 113 witnesses, including mine workers, guard officers, Citizens Alliance members, company executives, and WFM organizers. Eino testified on January 9th. He brought the composition notebook, the 9-page summary, the copy of the distribution plan, and his count logs for October and November. He presented them to the subcommittee in 74 minutes of testimony, speaking carefully in English. He had spent 11 years sharpening. He named Harold Custer. He named Cleve. He named the Corbin No. 7 duplicate key. He described the 5 cap incidents, the false log entries, the oil receipt, the schema for 7 shaft locations. He described Parker's departure and Trevelyan's warning and Seppala's account of the man in the light coat. The subcommittee council asked 41 questions. 2 of them were about the blasting caps. 38 were about union organizing activity, picket line conduct, and the WFM's leadership structure. The final report of the Donahue Subcommittee, published in February 1914, devoted 11 pages to union activity during the strike and 4 paragraphs to the Italian Hall disaster. The 4 paragraphs concluded that the identity of the person who shouted fire couldn't be determined, and that the disaster was the result of the volatile conditions produced by the strike, for which all parties bore some responsibility. The blasting cap discrepancy at the Calumet shaft house was noted in a single sentence in a footnote. Further investigation is recommended. No further investigation was conducted. Harold Custer left Calumet in the second week of January 1914. He moved to Ohio. He is listed in the 1920 census as a security consultant in Youngstown. He died in 1944. His obituary in the Youngstown paper did not mention Calumet. Gordon Cleve retired from C&H in 1919 with a company pension and a commendation for operational continuity during the strike period. He moved to Cornwall, England in 1921. He died there in 1933. The Citizens Alliance of Calumet dissolved formally in 1915. Its records, meeting minutes, membership rolls, financial accounts were surrendered to a company attorney and have not been located since. The strike ended in April 1914, after 9 months, with the WFM withdrawing without achieving the union recognition they had struck for. The one-man drill remained in operation. Approximately 1,200 workers left Calumet permanently and did not return. Eino Mäkinen continued as powder keeper at the Calumet mine until 1921, when he was laid off during a downturn in copper prices. He moved his family to Detroit, where he worked in an automotive parts factory until his retirement in 1939. He died in 1951 at the age of 79. The composition notebook survived him. His daughter Helvi, one of the 4 children he had watched walk down the street toward the Italian Hall on December 24th, 1913, and watched return unharmed, kept the notebook in a cedar box with his other papers. She read it twice, in 1951 after his death, and again in 1967 when she was working through the estate of her older brother Toivo. She did not know what to do with it. She considered donating it to a library and then did not because she was uncertain whether anyone would understand what it meant. In 1976, a labor historian named Thurner, working on a comprehensive history of the Calumet copper strikes, contacted surviving families of 1913 strike participants as part of his research. Helvi Mäkinen, then 75 years old and living in Detroit, replied to his inquiry letter. She told him about the notebook. He drove to Detroit and spent 2 days at her kitchen table reading it. He published his History of the Copper District the following year, and in Chapter 11, footnoted on page 219, he included a 4-paragraph account of the missing blasting caps, the duplicate key, the false log entries, and the distribution plan for 7 shaft locations. The footnote was the first time Eino's account appeared in print, 63 years after he gave his testimony to a congressional subcommittee that asked him about it twice and then moved on. The Italian Hall disaster has never been resolved. In 2009, the site of the Italian Hall was designated a National Historic Landmark by the National Park Service. The stairwell where 73 people died has been preserved behind glass at ground level. You can look down into it. The stairs are still there, narrow and wooden and going nowhere, because the building above them no longer exists. Historians have debated the identity of the person who shouted fire for more than a century. The Citizens Alliance has been the most commonly cited suspect. The company's culpability has been argued and partially established through analysis of the alliance's funding structure. But the specific operational chain, who gave an order, who followed it, what was planned before December 24th, and how long the planning had been underway, has never been documented from the inside, except in a composition notebook written in Finnish by a powder keeper who knew from the first morning he counted 156 caps where there should have been 200, that the number was wrong. He could not prove what the number meant. He kept counting anyway. The notebook is currently held in the Eino National Historical Park collection in Calumet, Michigan, cataloged under Mäkinen, E. Labor Materials, 1913 to 1914. The 9-page summary is in the same folder, still legible. The numbers in the margin column aligned with the particular care of a man who has been counting things all his life and understands that how carefully you count is the only control you have over what gets lost. 44 caps. No fire. 73 dead. 1 notebook.